I think it's really important to talk about the impact of music, how that helps shape character and drive the narrative. So if we can perhaps ask our performers how music has helped or helps to actually construct character and narrative for you. Would you like to talk a little bit about
sure.
that?
Jump right in.
Why not? When you're working with music, you've got an extra set of parameters that can limit you, or as we were just saying before, can actually liberate you somewhat. So in terms of developing George, there are certain elements. Obviously, when you're researching the man himself. You're then going into the text of what Lapine and Sondheim have based their viewpoint of George and what they felt he was like and what they tried to capture of him. On top of that, you then have the specific rhythms that they've chosen in Lapine's text in the first act. The rhythm of George in the first act is very different from George in the second act. George in the second act is the schmoozer. He's able to communicate on a personal level much more than George is capable of doing in the first act. So George's sentences in the first act are much shorter and much more to the point, are a little awkward, can be rather inappropriate at times. Then when you overlay the music, Sondheim's so specific with everything that he does, and there's this, we all know the pointillist work that we're talking about, the creation of this movement within the musical, and Sondheim has attempted to capture that with this very pointy staccato rhythm that takes place all the way through. Whilst that is a somewhat sort of romantic, in a sense, viewpoint of what the pointillist technique was, it's fast and it's quite frenetic, and for me it's a little bit of a way from George Seurat, the actual Seurat, who was very specific. One of my favourite quotes was, Seurat's brush thinks and reflects as it touches the canvas. Everything he was so specific. So you have to, whilst it would be nice to be able to really take time and get into that kind of meditative state and have that kind of stillness, that still quality that I believe the man himself possessed, Sondheim musically has gone for another facet of the man and the obsessiveness of the man. So there is this kind of intense, quite fast rhythm that dictates so many of the choices that you need to make. Then, of course, when you're talking about singing it and getting from a scene into a song, you're restricted somewhat. You have choices that you can make as to how the scene's going to pan out, but obviously you need to get the scene to a certain emotional height that you can kind of justify going into song. That you can't go any further. The only thing you can do is to enhance it with music. And we talked about the relationship that you have with the band, with what the character, the essence of the character is in the band itself. What instruments do you relate to? What is is there a specific instrument that maps out your character's journey somewhat? The horn is a recurring theme throughout, and often for me, there's normally a new thought process, an idea that comes with that. There are moments when that pointillist motif sort of comes in that sees George have a sudden change of thought and move off in a new direction. So these are all the guidelines, additional guidelines that you have when you're dealing with music as well.
It's funny that you should mention, how do you work within the parameters of a musical, and it dictates your choices. But I actually find, for me, the process is really, really similar to working in a play. We were talking a little bit before you guys were on about Chekhov, and I've done a bit of Tennessee Williams, and you look at all the greats, and the writing is so rich that I think all your choices are within the music and the language of the piece, and sometimes so specific that any rest that he writes, any incidental, any sharp, flat, if you repeat a phrase, if you say Sunday in the Park with George and then 5 minutes later you say it again, why are you saying it again? And it's actually it's quite freeing, because you're trying to figure out, the beauty and the brilliance of every little inflection, every little, and that's just in the rhythm and musicality of the piece. But of course, the book as well, the formality of the language that Lapine chose informs your choices. I wanted to pick it up and give a really intimate performance of here, and you couldn't. There's this really formal old world language, which kind of informs your choices. And the way I work is I always go to the text first. You have to go to the text, and you know that informs what others say about your character, what you say about your character, what the music says about your character. Why is she singing in a really brassy key, which is really belty in this song, and then later it's this really light, delicate, vulnerable, you know, key signature. If your instrument is tuned well and you're ready to begin it, if like We Do Not Belong Together or Children Not, if you just breathe through it and you're open to it, it will lead you to where you need to be emotionally. It's actually not. It's not. It's very complimentary.
I think it also, of course, at very basic level, it dictates the casting of the piece. When you're setting out to do something in the Back of George, you've got to find two people that can sing it and perform it and live. For example, Chrissy goes through so many different ideas that to reach the height of emotion that she needs to do in We Do Not Belong Together, and the beauty and the height of children and art in Act 2. That's the major dictating factor. You need to find cast that can actually do it. This piece is fascinating as well because it has a great mix of styles in its presentation. So you have operatic singing in it, you have music theatre singing, you have some people who are much more comfortable at being actors than they are as being singers, and it all blends beautifully in that whole idea that he's showing every different facet of society in that painting, and it's all reflected in the way the different styles of singing are perceived. There's only been one other production of this where George has been played by more of a baritone than a tenor, and that was in London. And it's the only time that's sometimes ever sanctioned it. The rest of the time he's insisted that this is the score as it is now, and nothing is to be transposed, nothing is to be changed from this particular production. It's very prescriptive, and as a director, I think it is liberating because you know he's clearly a major mind. Lapine is a major mind, and our job, a very famous man called Moss Hart, who directed, I've used this quote before, Moss Hart, who directed the original My Fair Lady and the original Camelot, believed that the job of a director was to put on stage what the authors had written tastefully, truthfully and theatrically. And that's the great joy of this particular piece, is that it is great art, and you need to find your way into it, and the music is the biggest key to that.